My father-in-law spent 15 years telling me I wasn't good enough for his son. He controlled every decision, every celebration, every moment of our marriage. Then karma came knocking in the most unexpected way, through my daughter's college acceptance letter. Now he reports to the grandchild he once ignored. If you love stories where karma comes full circle, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. I still remember the first time I met Harold Bennett. It was at a upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menus don't have prices and everyone speaks in hushed tones. My boyfriend Greg had been nervous all week, dropping hints that his father had very particular expectations. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd saved 3 months to buy, and I practiced conversation topics in the mirror like I was preparing for a job interview. In a way, I suppose I was. Harold arrived exactly on time, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He shook my hand with the grip of someone assessing merchandise, and I watched his eyes travel from my discount store shoes to my drugstore makeup. The disappointment on his face was instantaneous, like he'd bitten into an apple and found it rotten. Throughout dinner, he asked pointed questions about my family background, my father's job as a mechanic, my mother's work at the grocery store. Each answer seemed to confirm something unpleasant in his mind. When I mentioned I was working 2 jobs to finish my business degree, he smiled thinly and said, "How ambitious." The word dripped with condescension. Greg married me anyway, though I realize now that was his one and only rebellion. The wedding became Harold's production. He vetoed my choice of venue because it wasn't prestigious enough, eliminated half my guest list because they weren't the right kind of people, and actually told me my wedding dress made me look like I was trying too hard. My parents sat in the front row, looking small and out of place, and I felt a shame that burns in my chest even now, years later. That should have been my first clue about what the next decade and a half would look like. The control didn't stop after the wedding. It metastasized. Harold decided we should live in the house next to his. He'd bought it as an investment property. How convenient. So he could be close to his son. He got Greg a job at Bennett Manufacturing, the mid-sized industrial parts company where Harold had worked his way up to regional operations manager. Every Sunday dinner at Harold's house felt like a performance review. He'd ask about Greg's work, offer unsolicited advice about our finances, and make casual comments about how young couples these days didn't understand sacrifice or hard work. When I got pregnant, Harold immediately began planning our child's future. He wanted a boy, of course, someone to carry on the Bennett name and legacy. He'd already decided this child would attend his alma mater, work at the company, and eventually take over his position. I was 7 months along when I pointed out that I might have some say in raising my own child. Harold looked at me like I'd suggested the earth was flat. "Vanessa," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a particularly dim child, "Greg is a Bennett. This baby is a Bennett. You're simply the vessel bringing another Bennett into the world." I wanted to throw my water glass at him. Instead, I smiled and excused myself to the bathroom, where I cried silently for 20 minutes. Lily was born on a Tuesday morning in April, and she was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a lusty cry that filled the delivery room with life. Harold showed up at the hospital with a blue outfit he'd purchased weeks earlier. When the nurse told him he had a granddaughter, his face fell. "Well," he said after a long pause, "I suppose that's fine too." He held Lily for exactly 3 minutes before handing her back and saying he had to get back to work. That was the template for their entire relationship. Measured affection, constant distance, and a fundamental disappointment that she'd had the audacity to be born female. Lily grew up in Harold's shadow, always reaching for approval that never quite came. She was brilliant from the start, reading before kindergarten, solving math problems that made teachers blink in surprise, asking questions about how things worked that I had no idea how to answer. But Harold barely noticed. At family dinners, he'd ask Greg about work and ignore Lily entirely. When she'd try to tell him about a school achievement, He'd nod absently and change the subject. Once, when she was 8, she drew him a picture of the two of them holding hands. He glanced at it, said, "Very nice," and left it on the table when he went home. I watched my daughter's light dim a little more each year. She started asking me why Grandpa didn't like her, why he never wanted to hear about her day, why he seemed angry whenever she talked. I had no good answers. How do you explain to a child that some people's love is conditional? That she'd failed some test simply by existing in the wrong gender? I did what any mother would do. I became her champion, her cheerleader, her constant reminder that she was extraordinary. But I could see it wasn't enough to counteract Harold's indifference. When Lily was 14, she won the Riverside Regional Science Competition with a project on sustainable energy solutions. It was a huge deal. Only 3 students in the entire region had won in the past decade, and colleges were already taking notice. Harold suggested we celebrate with a family dinner. I should have known better. The entire evening, he dominated the conversation with stories about Greg's childhood achievements, his own career milestones, his opinions on the industry. Lily's award was mentioned once, in passing, like an afterthought. I watched my daughter's jaw tighten, watched her push food around her plate without eating. Finally, she excused herself and went to the bathroom. When she didn't come back after 15 minutes, I found her in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. Something in me snapped that night. I walked back into that dining room and told Harold exactly what I thought of him. I called him a bully, a narcissist, and a pathetic excuse for a grandfather. Greg tried to calm me down, but I was past caring. Harold sat there with his mouth hanging open, completely unused to anyone challenging him. When I finished, he stood up slowly and told Greg he expected an apology from his wife and better control over his household. Then he left. The fallout was immediate. Greg was furious with me for embarrassing his father. Harold stopped speaking to me entirely and made pointed comments about disrespectful women whenever I was within earshot. But something had changed in Lily. She'd seen me stand up to him, and it gave her permission to do the same. She stopped going to family gatherings. She stopped trying to win Harold's approval. Instead, she poured everything into her studies with a focus that was almost frightening. "I'm going to make something of myself," she told me one night while working on college applications. "And I'm going to do it without him. He'll see what he missed." I secretly helped her research schools, edit essays, and apply for scholarships. Harold assumed she'd go to the local community college. He'd actually said that girls didn't need fancy degrees, just practical skills to support a future husband. I wanted to scream. Instead, I helped my daughter build her escape route. The acceptance letters started arriving in March of Lily's senior year. MIT, Stanford, Caltech. Each one felt like a middle finger to Harold's low expectations. But there was something else too, something Lily had kept even from me until she was sure. She'd been accepted into the Founders Institute, an elite business accelerator program for student entrepreneurs. She'd been developing a revolutionary approach to sustainable manufacturing, using AI and new materials to reduce waste by 70%. She'd been working with a mentor, building prototypes, writing business plans, all while maintaining a 4.0 GPA and pretending to be just a normal high school kid at family dinners. When she finally told the family about MIT, Harold's reaction was predictable. He congratulated her with the enthusiasm of someone commenting on the weather, then immediately said that engineering was a man's field, and she'd probably struggle to keep up. Lily looked him dead in the eye and said, "Watch me, Grandpa." It was the last time she called him that with any warmth in her voice. I didn't realize how much damage Harold was doing to his own life while he was busy dismissing ours. Bennett Manufacturing was struggling. New environmental regulations were making their old processes obsolete, and competitors with modern approaches were eating their market share. Harold, stubborn as ever, refused to adapt. He mocked the very kind of sustainable manufacturing solutions that Lily was pioneering. The company started layoff rumors. Harold, at 63, was facing the real possibility of being pushed out of the job that defined his entire identity. Meanwhile, Lily was thriving. She graduated from MIT at the top of her class in just 3 years. Combining her engineering degree with business courses, her startup, Verde Tech Solutions, secured $8 million in venture capital funding before she turned 22. The technology she'd developed was exactly what struggling manufacturing companies needed to stay competitive and compliant with new regulations. She was featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and Bloomberg. My daughter, the one Harold had dismissed as adequate at best, was revolutionizing an entire industry. Harold, of course, dismissed it all as beginner's luck and trendy nonsense. He said sustainability was a fad and that real manufacturing required traditional approaches. The irony was almost painful. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Lily called me on a Wednesday afternoon, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. Not fear, but barely contained excitement. "Mom," she said, "Verde Tech just finalized the acquisition of Bennett Manufacturing. The board was desperate for a buyer, and we were the best offer. I'm now the owner of Grandpa Harold's company." I had to sit down. My hands were shaking. "Does he know?" I asked. "He found out this morning in the company-wide email. Mom, I need you to trust me on what happens next. I promise I'm not doing this for revenge. But there are some lessons that need to be taught." The following Monday, Lily walked into Bennett Manufacturing as the new CEO. Harold was sitting in the conference room with the other senior staff, and according to people who were there, his face went completely white when my 22-year-old daughter walked in wearing a sharp business suit and carrying the future of his company in her hands. She spent 2 hours presenting her vision for restructuring, modernizing processes, and implementing the very sustainable technologies Harold had mocked. She was professional, brilliant, and completely in control. Harold tried to interrupt her several times. Each time she politely said she'd take questions at the end. When he finally got his chance to speak, he blustered about experience and tradition, and how young people didn't understand the real world. Lily listened patiently, then explained exactly how his outdated approaches had nearly bankrupted the company, and why his resistance to change had made him a liability. Then came the part that still makes me catch my breath. Lily told Harold she wasn't firing him, but he would be transitioning to a new role. He would now report to the new director of operations, a brilliant 30-year-old woman he'd once told was too emotional for manufacturing work. He would be following new protocols, attending mandatory training on modern practices, and writing detailed reports on his progress. Every assumption he'd made about women, about young people, about who deserved power and respect, all of it was being systematically dismantled. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The part that made me understand my daughter's wisdom. 3 months into the restructuring, Lily called another company-wide meeting. She announced that she'd been doing research into Bennett Manufacturing's history and had discovered something interesting. 40 years ago, when the company was struggling during a recession, a young machinist had proposed a revolutionary efficiency improvement that saved the company from bankruptcy. That machinist had been promised profit sharing and partnership, but the management at the time had stolen his idea, given him a small bonus, and pushed him out of the company entirely. That machinist was my father, Lily's grandfather on my side, the one Harold had looked down on for being just a working-class tradesman. Lily had the documentation. She'd tracked down my father's original proposal notes, internal memos, everything. She looked directly at Harold and said, "This company owes its survival to the grandfather you dismissed at that wedding dinner. The grandfather whose daughter you treated like hired help. The grandfather whose granddaughter you ignored because she wasn't born male. Then she announced she was creating the Joseph Martinez Innovation Fund, named after my father, to support employee ideas and ensure no one's contributions would ever be stolen or dismissed again. I wasn't there, but Greg told me Harold left that meeting looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 hours. The man who'd built his identity on being smarter and better than everyone else had just learned that his position, his company, his entire legacy had been built partially on stolen work from the working-class man he'd spent years looking down on. That evening, Harold showed up at our door. He was crying. Actual tears from a man I'd never seen show real emotion. He apologized to me, to Greg, and asked if Lily would see him. She agreed. And I watched as this man who'd made my life miserable for 15 years sat in my living room and truly saw himself for the first time. He apologized to Lily for every dismissal, every cold shoulder, every time he'd made her feel less than. He didn't make excuses. He didn't justify. He just apologized. Lily listened, then said something I'll never forget. "Grandpa Harold, I don't need your approval anymore. I never did. But I'm willing to build something new if you are. Not based on who's I charge or who's right, but on actual respect. Can you do that?" It's been 2 years since then. Harold still works at what's now a thriving company under Lily's leadership. He's learning slowly to listen more than he talks. He shows up for Sunday dinners and actually asks Lily about her life, her work, her ideas. He asked my father to lunch and spent 3 hours hearing stories about the old days at the company. It's not perfect. Decades of arrogance don't disappear overnight, but it's something. As for me, I finally pursued the career I'd given up. Lily hired me as Bennett Manufacturing's Director of Community Relations, a role where my skills in connecting with people actually matter. I work alongside the man who once told me I was just a vessel for Bennett children. The irony tastes sweet every single day. People ask me if I feel sorry for Harold, if watching his fall was satisfying. The truth is complicated. I feel sorry for all the years he wasted being cruel, for all the connections he missed because his ego was too big to make room for love. But I also feel a deep satisfaction knowing that the granddaughter he dismissed is the one who taught him the most important lesson of his life. Power earned through cruelty is always temporary, but power earned through brilliance is unstoppable. Lily took Harold's cruelty and turned it into fuel. Every time he dismissed her, she worked harder. Every time he ignored her, she dreamed bigger. And when she finally had the power to destroy him, she chose instead to teach him. That's not just karma, that's grace. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had someone completely underestimate you? What happened? I read every single comment because these stories matter. And if you believe in karma, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere out there, someone is being dismissed, ignored, and told they're not good enough. And they need to know that karma doesn't forget. It just takes its time. Thanks for watching. And remember this, never underestimate the quiet ones. They're not hiding. They're busy planning empires.